Back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast here on Monday, February 3rd. If you missed the first segment, we just went over the biggest news of the day, Myles Garrett requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns this morning. But over the weekend, we had another thing develop in the NFL with the Las Vegas Raiders. And usually, as things typically go, when any team wins a national championship, right, everyone comes snooping around for, new coaches. They come snooping around your coaching staff, and more often than not, very successful teams end up losing a coordinator here or there, and it might not seem like a big thing, but it's always, ends up being something of a lot of emphasis, I would say, because, I don't think coordinators get enough attention sometimes when you're talking about the whole collective group, and that's what Ohio State, must deal with now, that they won the national championship, and now both of their coordinators are moving on. A season after they had all this success, they won the first ever college football playoffs, the first ever 12-team pool, obviously. Now their former defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, is joining Penn State as their new defensive coordinator. And now, according to ESPN, their offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, has come to an agreement with the Raiders to become their new offensive coordinator. So Ryan Day is going to be looking for some new coordinators, both of them leaving him after this season. And to focus on Chip Kelly, returning to the NFL is some pretty big news. After only one season with the Buckeyes, Kelly is back as an offensive coordinator this time in the NFL, something he's actually not done at the NFL level. He's been a head coach, but not actually an offensive coordinator. His previous time in the NFL was in Philadelphia as one of the starting points, where he was a head coach from 2013 to 2015. He finished with a 26-21 record there in the 3 seasons that he had, but it was a 6-9 season, I believe, in his third year, where things, just kind of met a breaking point, and the two sides decided to go their separate ways. But then he moved on to be the head coach of the 49ers back in 2016, but he only lasted one season there because they were an abysmal 20-14. They won their first game in week 1, and then they lost 13 straight after that. So his time in San Francisco was a disaster as a head coach, and then after some time on television, I believe, then he went and joined up with the UCLA Bruins, became their head coach and whatnot, and he spent some time there before, coming to Ohio State and taking on their offensive coordinator duties this past season, right? So, you look at this past season and you look at the recent sort of body of work for Chip Kelly, and I think there was no better offense this year across the landscape of college football than Ohio State, and a lot of it, people will point to the talent, obviously, with Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Will Howard played pretty well, Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson, all these guys having a lot to do with that, right? The personal talent and individual skill set shouldn't be overlooked, but I think Chip Kelly also coming in and implying his ideas, his offensive scheme and things like that to this group, I think really made a difference, getting them over that hurdle of falling in the big games and just falling short of the moment. I think he had a big part to do in that, and how unstoppable this offense really looked as well. So with that, I think, with that in mind, it's exciting that you hire someone coming off of that amount of success, right, with Ohio State. And I also saw Jeremiah Smith, the freshman wide receiver, react to Chip Kelly leaving, and it seemed like it was a pretty big deal. Obviously, like, he held Chip Kelly in high regard, and he didn't want him to leave. So you can take that and the body of work that he put out there in college football this past season, and it's exciting to bring in a guy like that, Chip Kelly, who has been mentioned as a offensive mind, a very creative and, a very creative and, just innovative offensive mind. I think that was the idea when he came into Philadelphia. It didn't really work out as a head coach, but I think, like we've typically talked about in some of these cases with head coaching and offensive coordinators, or just really any coordinators in general. You got some guys that can do both, that can take a promotion, that can really transition seamlessly into being a head coach. But then other guys, it just doesn't really suit them, and that's all right. But some guys like Josh McDaniels, I'll throw Chip Kelly in there, Arthur Smith, Jeff Ulbrich a little bit in his short sample time as a interim head coach. I'd say he's a better coordinator. I'm trying to think of anybody else that comes to my mind just right off the top of my head. I can't really think of anybody else. Those are the ones that really jump out at me. A lot of them on the offensive side, but there's no problem with that. I just think it's a matter of, I guess, just accepting it, right? That some guys are just better coordinators, and I think Chip Kelly can kind of fit into that, group of people as well. As a head coach, might not have worked out. It doesn't for a lot of people, and I think as an offensive coordinator, it could go a lot better if Chip Kelly just has to focus on the offensive side of the ball and making sure that this group plays to the best of their abilities week in and week out. But with that being said, he's not walking into a plethora of riches in Las Vegas, right? Not by any means. He's not walking into a room full of 5-star recruits or anything like that, right? There's only a few 5-star players, you would say, on this team. So it's going to be one of his biggest tests. It's one of the biggest challenges across the NFL on how the Raiders in this new era with Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly and these guys kind of turn the situation around for the Raiders, and also led by Tom Brady, Mark Davis, and those guys upstairs. This is a very, very infant level project that it is at right now, right? It's still in the infant stage, right? They don't really have a lot of a foundation yet, right? A lot of new players coming in, a lot of new coaches, new identity, just a whole really clean slate for this Las Vegas Raiders team. And with Chip Kelly, it's exciting that he now has the freedom, I'm sure, to kind of mold this thing how he wants to, but it's not going to be easy, just bringing in all the players you want, right? It's going to be a challenge to kind of bring them in free agency, but they do have one of the biggest cap spaces, or some of the most money in the NFL to spend. They actually have the second most cap space at $92.5 million. So that's great. Free agency is really going to be their area where they're going to go out there and try to acquire the players that they feel fit the mold of this team, right? There's a lot of good opportunities out there. Like, you think of a lot of great receivers out there, like Chris Godwin or T. Higgins, that are free agents, or some offensive linemen like Trey Smith is going to be a free agent. Ronnie Stanley is another one. Across the defensive line, if you wanted to reinforce that, you got Oza Adigizua from the Cowboys, Josh Sweat's a free agent, Khalil Mack, I also believe, is a free agent, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a bunch of options out there, right? And some of the biggest ones that stand out for the Raiders are mainly on the offensive side of the ball, I would say, quarterback being the biggest one. And I'm not sure if that's where you'd want to go in free agency for the quarterback. Hopefully they get someone like Shedeur Sanders in the first round at 6, if he's there, and that's a big if. But if he's there at 6, I think that would be the ideal scenario for Chip Kelly and this offense to try and get their future quarterback in their building. But other than that, you look at wide receivers, they have Jacoby Myers, which is solid, but they definitely need a lot more. Running backs, another one. That's a spot where you can look at guys like Najee Harris would be interesting, bringing him in. I think that's been mentioned a little bit, so how successful they'll be at bringing him in is a different story, but I've seen them being linked with him. Offensive line as well, again, just across the board, just improving that unit would go a long way, but they are very fortunate to have, already in the conversation for one of the best tight ends in Brock Bowers, right? He's the face of this team, I would say, right? Him and like Max Crosby, I would say, are both the faces of this team already. So building around him and having the wherewithal for Chip Kelly to really use him, and not only meeting his abilities, but exceeding those and getting him to play even better. And that seems kind of crazy to mention because of the historic season that he had. But it's only his first year, and the potential of Brock Bowers, I think, could be so much more if, again, met with the right coaching and the right game plan around it. So he could easily lead this offense and be the face of them, but how you support him, how you build around him is obviously the biggest factor around that. So very, very new still, this project with the Raiders, but they got their new head coach in Pete Carroll, their defensive coordinator staying around in Patrick Graham, and now they're bringing in the offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. So they got the biggest parts of their coaching staff together. Now it'll be a lot more of detailed and very detailed and oriented, steps moving forward for this team, how they want to set it up, creating a game plan, creating a blueprint of what they want this team to look like, evidently, before they get to, the biggest part of the offseason, or at least the first part in free agency. So Chip Kelly there as the new guy, he'll be leading this offense, and we'll see if they could get to at least playing better than what they did last year, right? But the quarterback is obviously a big part of it, so we'll see where we go with the Raiders and Chip Kelly. That is that segment, so moving on from that now, heading into another break, but when we return, we're going to talk some more about some coaching in the NFL. Going back to a topic that we previously covered, more information has come out on the Saints and their interest in Kellen Moore, currently the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, but there has been some more development with him and the New Orleans Saints that we're going to discuss when we return after this.
Looking